In 2003, the author Donald Miller published his second book, Blue Like Jazz. And it came out to lackluster sales. It was selling a little bit, but was pretty slow and well below what he and his publisher were hoping to accomplish with this book. And then suddenly, after the book had been out well over a year, it started selling, and then it hit the New York Times bestseller list, and it went on to sell over 1.5 million copies. So what happened? What took this book that was destined to slide into obscurity and suddenly help it find an audience and take off? Well, it all came down to one tactic that the author did that changed everything. And it's a tactic that any author can use, and I'm going to share that with you in this video. My name is Tim Grahl. I'm the CEO of StoryGrid, and I'm the author of 6 books, including Running Down a Dream, Your First 1,000 Copies, and my upcoming novel, The Shithead. Now, besides StoryGrid, what I'm actually known for in the publishing industry is book marketing. I've been a book marketing consultant for over 15 years. I've launched dozens of books to the top of the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and other bestseller lists, and I've trained thousands of authors on writing and marketing their books as well. And so when I talk about this idea of book marketing and the tactics that go into it, I know what I'm talking about. I've been doing this a really long time. Now, my partner, Shawn Coyne, he's the creator and founder of StoryGrid, and he's an editor and writer with over 30 years of experience, and he's been in publishing since 1991. And so he has an extreme amount of success and guidance that he can give us when we're looking at putting books out into the world as well. And one of the things he told me early on when we started working together is that it's easier to sell a book than to get somebody to read it. And I always thought this was a little strange. What are you talking about? It's harder to get somebody to read your book than to give you money for your book? And he would say yes. And then I realized he was right. So let's take this book, for example. This book is titled The Sand Sea. We published it here at StoryGrid, and it's a great read. It's a fantasy novel that's a mix between Raiders of the Lost Ark and a Game of Thrones. I love this book, and I can't wait for the sequel. The author's working on it right now. But look at this thing. It's over 700 pages long. So let's say you don't like fantasy books, that reading a fantasy book sounds awful to you, and I gave you a choice, and I said, okay, you can either get a free copy of The Sand Sea and read it, or you can just give me 30 bucks. Well, most of you would probably say, I'd rather give you 30 bucks than have to read a book that I don't want to actually read. And then there we have it. It's easier to get people to buy a book than actually sit down and read it. And this is the hard thing about book marketing. If somebody comes to me and they say, how can I sell 100,000 copies of my book? The answer is, I don't know. And if anybody tells you otherwise, they're full of shit. They don't know what they're talking about, because there is no direct way to sell 100,000 copies of a book unless you're planning on spending roughly 7 figures to market that book. So if you don't have an extra $1 million or more to market your book, the odds of you being able to just directly sell 100,000 copies is basically zero. And yet, books sell 100,000 copies. So how does that happen? The only way a book can sell 100,000 copies or 1 million copies is through word of mouth. If somebody reads a book and then tells 5 or 10 other people about it, that's the only way a book really spreads. So throughout my time in publishing, I kept hearing this magic number of 10,000. 10,000. If you can sell 10,000 copies of your book, then your book has a chance of going on to sell and sell and sell. And so what is it about this 10,000 number? Why does that matter? Well, that's the point where you find out if your book actually has legs, if it's going to go out into the world and keep selling. Because here's the sad truth. For most books, if 10 people read them, those 10 people might tell 1 person, maybe 2, but maybe not any at all. And then you have books that if you can get 10 people to read the book, they'll go on to tell another 100 people about the book. And so that's where word of mouth actually kicks in. So if we wonder how these books that sell 10,000 or 20,000 copies go on to sell 100,000, 1 million copies, well, it's because of this. It's because the word of mouth kicked in. Now, how do you write a book so that when 1 person reads it, they will tell 10 other people? Well, I'm going to come back to that. But before we can get there, we have to talk about piracy. And to talk about piracy, we have to talk about the famed fantasy author Neil Gaiman. So Neil Gaiman, I saw an interview with him many years ago, and he gave this quote right here. "Then I started to notice two things that seemed much more significant. One of which was that places where I was being pirated, particularly Russia, where people were translating my stuff into Russian and spreading it out into the world, I was selling more and more books. People were discovering me through being pirated. And then they were going out and buying the real books. And when a new book would come out in Russia, it would sell more and more copies." Neil Gaiman goes on to tell a story where it took some convincing with his publisher, but he started giving away free ebook copies of American Gods online. Just free copies. And this was a book that was selling well. So they gave away a bunch of free copies online to anybody that wanted them. And then what happened? Well, sales of the book went up 300%. And I've seen this over and over in my 15 years in publishing, where when a book gets leaked or it starts getting pirated and passed around, all of a sudden, sales start going up and they start selling more and more copies. So what's going on here? Why is that piracy causing more sales? Well, we're back to word of mouth. Somebody pirates the copy, reads it, loves it, tells a bunch of people, they end up going and buying a copy of the book. Just this year, I have a friend that's coming out with a book in just a few weeks, and he printed off and gave away 8,000 early editions of his book before it came out. And it got so popular that people were offering to buy copies of the early edition so they could give it to other people. And so he gave away 8,000 copies before his book came out, and it's already driving a huge amount of demand. So now let's go back to that story of Donald Miller and his book, Blue Like Jazz. So like I said, the book was not selling very well. Very lackluster sales. It was selling a little bit, but way under what he was expecting, what his publisher was expecting. And then all of a sudden, it turned around and started selling. So what happened? What caused that spike in sales that would go on to sell 1.5 million copies of this book? Well, a particular religious organization that is active on campuses, college campuses, all over the United States, really liked his book. And they decided to give away a copy to all the students that are in their organization. So they ended up giving away 150,000 copies of Blue Like Jazz. And then this is what sparked the sales of the book, to where it went on to sell 500,000, then 1 million, then 1.5 million copies of the book and become a New York Times bestseller. So those people that got the book for free, read the book, loved it, and started telling people about the book. And that's when the book started selling. And so here's the tactic. Give your book away. Literally give your book away to anybody that you think will read it. It doesn't matter which format, ebook, audiobook, print, it doesn't matter. Give away as many copies as you possibly can. I'm doing this right now for my book, The Shithead. I've given away over 1,500 copies of that book. Over 300 of them have been the paperback version of the book. And yes, this isn't free. I have to pay to print the book and then ship out the book to people. But it's the cheapest form of advertising because they're going to read the book and they're going to tell other people about the book. You literally cannot give away too many copies of the book. Again, think about Donald Miller's story. He gave away 150,000 copies, and that's what sparked all of the sales. And so everything that you hear about in marketing, building an email list, blogging, podcasting, any of these things, you should think about it as building an audience so that when you have a book, you can give it away to people. But the overarching goal of all of this, the thing you should always be thinking is, who is likely to like my book, who read it and like it and tell other people? I'm going to give them a copy of the book. And I'm just going to give it to them so that they'll read it and that word of mouth will start spreading. So now I have to address the elephant in the room, that giant 800-pound gorilla sitting in the corner. How do you write a book that people will actually tell other people to read? Because like I said, most books, if you get 10 people to read them, it's not going to turn into word of mouth. So how do you actually do this? And what I love is I'm already seeing this happen with my book, The Shithead. So many of the people that I gave early copies to, they've come back and asked if I can send a copy to a friend or if they can give their ebook copy to a friend of theirs. And of course, my answer is always yes, and I drop a copy in the mail to their friend. But I'm seeing this happen. I finally wrote a book that I think other people are actually going to tell people to read, and I'm seeing it happen in these early days. So what changed? Because this didn't happen with my first novel. If I got 10 people to read that book, it did not turn into 10 more or 100 more sales. Well, I focused on leveling up my skills as a writer. If you go back and read my first novel, The Threshing, and compare it to what I wrote in The Shithead, it's so much better because I focused on leveling up my skills as a writer. So that's actually what we do here at StoryGrid, is we help teach you the skills so that you can level up your writing. So when you write a book, it will be something that readers will love, will change them, will make them feel something, and be a book that they want to give to other people, and your book can start spreading. So I've got 2 things for you if you want to take advantage of this. First of all, I have a 13-point scene writing checklist. So when we're teaching the skills of writing, we start with how to write a great scene, and we have 13 things that a scene has to have in order to work really well. And you can download that right now by going to storygrid.com/checklist. The second thing I have is the StoryGrid Scene Writing Workshop. And you can go to storygrid.com/workshop to check that out. This is a 6-week scene writing class that will change the way you write. You can go there now and see all of the testimonials of our students, but this has been a life-changing thing for so many of our students, where they learn more on writing and they get better at their writing in 6 weeks than the previous years of trying to do it on their own. So I highly recommend you join us for that at storygrid.com/workshop. So that's the one big tactic, that if you don't know what to do with your book marketing, if you have a book coming out and you're not sure what to do, the number one thing you can do is connect with people that you think will like it, and then just give them a copy. And give away as many copies as you can to people that you think will read and enjoy your book. Now, I'd love to hear what you think about this idea. So go down in the comments and let me know what you think about this one tactic for marketing your book. If you found this helpful at all, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel so that you get notified of all the future videos we come out with. And as always, thanks for being a writer. Thanks for being a part of our community here at StoryGrid, and I'll see you next time.